Did you see the moon the other night? It was clear. It was bright. You could have almost heard that crystal clear white light. It was like tapping a glass, that note, that feeling of brightness, of crisp clarity. You might not know this, but the moon shines brighter over marshlands than over ordinary land. Did you know that? It's true. I'll tell you why. The moon has been shining for millions of years. She's guided, in the olden days, animals, but now people across the marshes. She always takes care to make sure they're safe, but the moon does need 2 or 3 days a month to just go dark and rest. All magic needs a rest from time to time. And in one of the dark times, the moon thought, I want to go down and see what the earth is like. I hear people complaining about how dark it is when I don't shine, and I hear people complaining about the earth and how muddy and slippery it is, but I just want to see for myself whether it's as bad as people say or if people are whinging. I think people do whinge a bit. So she wrapped her black cloak around her and pulled the hood down low, and she jumped down to earth. And she landed in the middle of a marshland. And she saw how very dark it was. There weren't many stars that night, and she made her way across the path, and it was muddy and it was slippery. And without light, even the light of her own feet under the cloak, she couldn't really see where she was going. She was treading into the mud, and it became squelchy and slippery, and it was that sucky mud. And then she tripped, and she slipped, and she reached out for a tree. But the tree was a hag in disguise, and it reached out its twiggy fingers and caught her wrists and held them like manacles. She wriggled and she fought. She would have screamed, but I don't know if you know, the moon has no voice. And she couldn't get free. And the more she wriggled, the more the branches twisted around her wrists and held her tight. And then the boggarts and the boggles and the things from the dark and the slippery, slidey, slurpy things that live in the marsh came sliding and writhed round her ankles and pulled her down into a dark, marshy pool. She fought, she twisted, she wriggled, but she was just sucked down deeper and deeper, and the green, smelly, trickling water slipped around her waist and up under her arms. And then she heard a scream in the dark. She turned around. Who was screaming? Help! Help! The voice came. Please, someone help me. I've lost the path. Help! And the little blue will-o'-the-wisps came up out of the mud, and they started dancing around. Come this way. No, come this. Round and round. Come this way. No, follow me, follow me. I have the light. Follow me, follow me. And the man went one way and went the other, but he could not find the way. And the moon was so worried for the poor, frightened man, she threw back her head, the one thing that was free, and her silver hair cast moonbeams across the marsh. And in that moment, the man saw where the path was and how to get back, and he turned and he ran and he found the path again, without stopping to think whether the moon herself needed help. He just ran and ran and ran towards houses not that far away. And the moon ached to be able to call out, to have someone take her hand and pull her out of the black, peaty water. But the moon was pulled down and down, and the hags and the boggarts pulled her black cloak forward and pushed her head under the cold, chilling, gloopy, thick water. Down and down they pushed her at the bottom of this black peat pool. And then some of the bigger boggarts found a tall standing stone left over from eons before and hauled it across the mud and pushed it over the moon's body. It lay there like a black coffin, and her last rays of light just shone weakly around the edges. It was too heavy for her to move, and nobody knew she was there. And there she lay, night after night. And the people of the marsh began to wonder why the moon had not come back to the sky. The stars were there and the time was right. This should have passed. The moon should be up there. Days passed, weeks passed, a whole month passed, and still the moon had not come back, even on the clearest nights. And the villagers went to the wise woman who lived in the old mill at the edge of the village and said, "Lady, please tell us what has happened to the moon." And she poured clear spring water into her silver bowl. She passed her hands over the reflection and looked in and said, "I do not know. It is dark." The villagers were heartbroken, but the old woman said, "But if you can bring me a clue, any clue, if you can tell me any gossip you have, any ideas you have, any faint memories of who saw the moon last, any clue might help." So the villagers went back very sad. It was time for the moon to come again, and she still had not appeared. But the man who the moon had rescued came that way again. And he crossed the marsh, and he got to the village, and he put up at the inn that night, for he wasn't going to pass over a moonless black swamp again. And he sat in the pub that night with his pie and his beer, and he heard the villagers talking about the old woman and how she didn't know what had happened to the moon. And then he remembered that when he'd been lost and that silver light had shone out, he had seen what he thought was a kind old face from out of the light. And he said, "Excuse me, please, gentlemen, I think I have seen the moon." And he told everybody exactly what had happened. They were astounded, and they said, come with us, come with us." And they took him down the road to the old woman in the mill. And the man told his story, and the old woman said, "Let me try looking into the mirror again." She poured more spring water into the silver bowl, passed her hands 3 times over the surface, and breathed on it. And this time she smiled. She said, "You must go out onto the marsh. You must put salt in your pocket and a hazel twig in your hair. That will protect you from the boggarts and the bogles and the hags. But you must also put a stone into your mouth so you remember not to breathe a word. And then go over the marsh to where this man last saw the moon. And you must look for a coffin, a candle, and a cross." Everybody thought this was very strange, but they knew the wise woman never, ever minced words. If she said something was true, it was. So they all took stones, and yes, I think they washed them, and put them in their mouths, and they put salt in their pockets and hazel twigs in their hair or in their hat bands. And they went out over the marsh, and the man the moon had rescued led them, until they came to where he had drifted from the path. They looked around in the dark and held their lanterns high. And then somebody said, "That tree over there looks sort of cross-shaped? And is that a bit of a glow from the pool? It's just will-o'-the-wisp, the others said. But the man the moon had rescued walked over the tussocky grass, and there he saw at the bottom of a deep pool a long coffin-shaped stone, and around it was a soft, pale light, just like a candle light, glowing up from the bottom of the water. He knew he mustn't speak, and all the others came round, and because they were superstitious, they said the Lord's Prayer forwards and then backwards, just in case the devil was looking over their shoulders. They threw salt over. And then the strongest men waded down into the water, and between them they lifted this enormous stone and heaved it to one side, and the moon shot up, her old, pale, wrinkled face alive with joy. Her pale yellow gown dripped with the marshy mud, and it flowed away, and her white hair sprang out into the night, sending moonbeams this way and that. And with a joyful, silent laugh, she sprang into the sky. And the men looked up, and some bowed and some touched their heads, and they all called out, "Thank you." And she sat up in the sky and showed them the way safely back home. And that is why, if you look at the moon, you must always say thank you. And if you look at the moon from marshland, you will see that it shines more brightly there than anywhere else on earth.